Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. Where today I'm going to talk about the whole AI music thing. Oh, not one of those streams again. No, fear not, because I'm going to talk about it in a very different way to that which we've been hearing about it thus far. So, just to recap what everyone in the music and music analysis world is talking about. Will AI replace musicians? Will it replace composers? Will it replace lyricists? Will it replace rappers, guitar players, drummers, etc.? And the answer is it depends. If you want music that just delivers something formulaic, AI has already replaced the whom's in that respect, and other forms of technology going all the way back to things like MIDI and drum machines and samplers have replaced many elements of the human creative process that goes into making music a long time ago. But if you truly want something original and creative and emotive and interesting, you're still going to have that old human touch somewhere down the line. And the more of all of those things that you want in your music, the more whom's you are going to require. But what about an area of music that has never required creativity per se, being a music executive? So let's go back to the era before the intranet and look at what the role of a music executive was. And it can really be boiled down to two things. Number one, they were an investor. And number two, they were a gatekeeper. Now, let's look at each one of those things separately. So, what sort of things did record companies, and by extrapolation, the executives of these companies, what did they invest in? Well, one, they invested in studio time so that artists could record. They always asked for the money back from the artists, which was, people have different opinions on that. Gene Simmons thinks it's a good thing. Artists that have found themselves in debt and, debt slavery to the music industry have a different point of view. So some like it, some don't, but they invested in that. What else did they invest in? Most importantly, I would say they invested in the actual mechanical processes of making and distributing records. So these are record pressing plants, tape dubbing plants, CD manufacturing plants later on, and all of the other formats that have come and gone over the years. These things are made in a factory, and someone needs to either own the factory or pay for the use of a third party's factory that's contracted out. Hence, this is an important form of investment that could have come from other places, but 9.5 times out of 10 came from the record companies themselves, as did the idea of getting the merchandise, in this case the record tape, CD, etc., from the factory to the record store. And hence we have distribution networks, some of which were very complicated, that helped get that nice shiny record to your local Tower Records or Licorice Pizza or Amoeba or whatever is in your locale. So we have that aspect of it. All of that is to do with investment. Now, what about gatekeeping? What is this element of it? Well, because it isn't free to own a factory and to use it to make records, which require Joe Biden moment. Can I still have those? I've been having a few of them. It requires things like petroleum. That became an issue after 1973, don't you know? And magnetic tape doesn't come out of the sky, nor does the glass and plastic used to make a compact disc. So there's the materials. And so because there's a finite amount of material, they cannot sign every band that comes their way, even if they wanted to. And this is an interesting concept. So part of the reason that the gatekeeping aspect of the record executive existed was because they needed to decide, right, if we're going to spend all of this petroleum and factories that are on property that we either own or lease and all of this, we want to invest it on musicians who will sell a lot of records, move a lot of units. And so that's where you get into the parts of the music industry that a lot of people, and largely myself included, find repugnant, where you have people that are not musicians, and in many cases, not even ardent music consumers, who are making these business decisions about a field they don't know. Now, there have always been exceptions. Someone like Ahmet Ertegun, smaller labels that are owned by musicians. Think Strata East, the great jazz label owned by Stanley Cowell and Charles Tolliver, two great musicians in their own right. And there are many other labels that bands start. There was Threshold Records, started by the Moody Blues, Swan Song, started by Zeppelin. They, of course, signed Bad Company, but those are the exceptions. Usually it's someone who knows about music from an industry standpoint. He can probably recognize vaguely what sounds like the thing that was the big hit 6 months or a year ago, but a lot of these people just aren't musicians and don't really understand music. Now, think if you had a CEO or executive chairman of General Motors who knew how to drive a car, but didn't really know anything about the mechanics of it, didn't know the difference between torque and horsepower, didn't know the difference between air suspension and McPherson struts and all of these various things. Imagine you had an aviation CEO that didn't know about planes. Some would argue that we've seen a few of those, and that has resulted in much turbulence, to say the least. So generally, you would think that an executive at a company should either have experience, knowledge, or at least profound excitement and devotion to the product beyond just the profit motive. But a lot of times that isn't true. Now, Clive Davis was someone who certainly knew about the music industry, wasn't a musician. He was a lawyer by training, and he's been around for ages. And the reason I mention his name is because yesterday, the Midnight Special played an episode of the program, which was hosted by Clive Davis. Very unusual. Typically, it's hosted by creative individuals, musicians, and in some cases, comedians. Think George Carlin and Richard Pryor, who have hosted it, not record executives. Was any payola involved? I'm not accusing anyone or anything. But it was somewhat of a downer because he, while he was trying his best to look and sound cool, he didn't. The episode was built around an interview of Davis by Loggins and Messina, who did a very good job of, putting the guitar down and putting on the journalistic cap. So well done, because, Loggins and Messina, they're musicians, not journalists, but they sounded very objective yet friendly in their interview of him. But there were things about some of the things he said that really bothered me. He said, "Oh, R&B lyrics usually aren't very meaningful or interesting." And after hosting one of my favorite bands ever on the show, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and being all lovey-dovey with them on camera, 5 minutes later he tells Kenny Loggins, "Well, they're not selling many records anymore. Chicago's selling more." As I love both bands, but like, come on, a bit polite. You're on camera, dude. And what else did he say that really sort of ground my gears? There was just a notion that he told Kenny Loggins and Jim Messina to the face, "Well, you didn't really sell much at first. It was more of a gradual thing." And I get it's not a lie, but the way he said it just wasn't the kind of thing that you would hear from someone who loves music like Wolfman Jack, the normal sort of face of that program. It wouldn't be the thing that you'd ever hear, at least not spoken in that kind of tone, on a Rick Beato show, which is a celebration of music and about educating people about music. Not to blow my own trumpet in the Blood, Sweat, and Tears horn sections, but it's certainly something you wouldn't hear on this this channel. Um, it's free, folks. But there you have it. If he was trying to look his coolest, you can imagine the dark sarcasm and cynicism of record executives behind the scenes. And I can already hear the comments, "Well, they have to be because they're not able to just give everyone a contract. Derpity derp derp derp." Yeah, I already explained that. And that's all true. But is it still true? I said it was true, but is it still true? Well, let's look at the two functions of record executives and that applied in the pre-intranet age, and see if some, all, or none of it applies right here, right now in 2020. Let's say five. Yeah, I think it does. So the idea of investment. Do you need investment to make music? Well, you need some. Unless you know how to make your own guitar, amplifier, drum set, or piano, you're going to need some investment. But Studio time, a lot of people record at home, and a lot of people's primary recording device is a computer that they probably bought for other purposes initially, because that Mac on your table can do a lot more than just act as a mini recording studio. Things like microphones, sound baffles, obviously like that, but the investment, and I'm not deriding it, because a poor kid on welfare isn't going to be able to afford this stuff unless he steals it, which I know is legal in California, though it should not be. But the point is, the kind of investment that you need to record yourself, or your band or another person's band today is astronomically less than it was in the pre internet age, where studio time, particularly at a good studio, was very, very, very expensive. So the investment required to record still there, but much less than it used to be. And again, you don't need to go anywhere to do it. You can turn your friend's garage into a recording studio. You can turn your room into a recording studio. So again, the investment and the time it takes, is as much or as little as you want, because again, you're not on the clock the way that you were at a professional recording studio. So there's that element of the investment. What about the investment of owning the factories and pressing the records and distributing? That now is virtually zero, because that is all in the cloud. There is no physical media. I mean, there is, because there's the audiophile market, sometimes like physical material, even though you've got audiophile DSD downloads, 24 192 downloads. And then there's the novelty physical market. But on the whole, the physical market's gone. We listen to music on the cloud, and generally the musicians themselves don't need to pay for the hosting, because DSPs, companies, so the streaming companies like Spotify and Apple and Tidal and Amazon and Deezer and all the others, they don't charge you for streaming because they want music on their platform. People pay these companies a subscription fee, or in other cases, companies advertise on them because they attract listeners. And what attracts listeners? A wide selection of music. So the distribution and production aspect of a recorded medium, that is, to most musicians these days, that is virtually a cost of zero. And that is a huge difference, because, I mean, think of the land that some of these record pressing factories were on. The land alone could be worth several million, depending on where in the world it's located. Certainly, the equipment in there, when you tally it all together, is worth well over a million. So that is a huge change in terms of the investment role of the record executive, the record company. Not the recording reduced to to not zero, but a lot less. You can record an album without more than a three-figure investment, assuming you already own a decent enough laptop, or desktop. So there's that. And then the biggest area where the costs have gone down are the manufacturing and distribution of the medium that the audience, the consumer, uses to listen to the music. Whoa, whoa, listen to the music, as they say. So those are the biggest areas of investment. And again, in these areas, the record companies are no longer needed. And this relates to the main role of gatekeeping, because, as I said, the gatekeeping role is intrinsically tied to the fact that you can't sign every artist to an album deal that you come across. In some ways, and don't get me wrong, I don't like most of these music executives, but in some ways, maybe they would have wanted to, because if it didn't cost so much to press records and distribute them, if it, let's say, was just the cost of recording, you could probably recoup the several thousand it would have cost to have a mediocre band in a mediocre studio for maybe 3 days, just by selling records locally. But that model didn't exist then. So the gatekeeping role, I would say, is kind of gone too, except for the one part of gatekeeping that I didn't mention. The idea that, oh, we can only sign the artists that we think will be profitable, that's the one end of it. But then there's a much nastier end, an even nastier end of the gatekeeping world than that. And this is marketing. Now, how is marketing gatekeeping? Shouldn't that be under investment, you stupid idiot? No, hear me out. So the reason I put that under gatekeeping is because a record company can make or break an album or even an artist based on how they market them. If they don't let the people know that this is an album you should listen to, and ideally provide them some objective reasons why, like if you like jazz rock and if you like people who sound like Michael McDonald, maybe you'll like a bit of Christopher Cross. Okay, that's somewhat informative. Comparisons aren't always accurate, but they're somewhat helpful. So it's there's the informational aspect, and then there's the propaganda aspect of making a band that, let's say, is not very interesting, not very original, not very emotive in their music. It can make a non-entity into something big if, for whatever reason, the record company is behind it, because people share lawyers, because someone's nephew is friends with someone else. It's a dirty, filthy world, the record business, just as a lot of businesses are. And so there is that. And so that led me to the question, okay, the music studio largely replaced by the home workstation. The distribution and manufacturing model irrelevant. If you want, you can have hypothetically a billion people can listen to your song, and you don't need to press a single record. So that's irrelevant from a technical point of view these days. Which also makes the initial element of the gatekeeping irrelevant. Now, what about the marketing? Well, the record companies certainly don't have a monopoly on marketing for music anymore. You can buy ads on X and Instagram and TikTok and all of the rest of it. You can do guerrilla advertising. You can bribe people the old fashioned way. And so at this point, what are record labels really for? Well, they're PR. These days, they're effectively PR companies that specialize in music. That is most of what they do. And yes, they still invest a bit in some of their big artists. And the reason they invest in them in terms of the music making is because they know they want to invest in them in terms of their marketing and public relations. But that's really all the music industry is these days, which leads me back to the question that we began with today. Can music executives be replaced by AI? And I would say yes. You can put you let's say that you have an artist, whether it's a human artist or an AI artist, and you can tell the AI, okay, strategize and itemize a marketing campaign for this act. And and you could either say, I want a marketing campaign so that this music artist appeals to women ages 18 to 35. Or you could even say, based on the sound of this music, who do you think we should market it to? Let's say that it's a country musician whose lyrics are very conservative. Okay, we'll market it to red states, and we'll maybe even target people based on voter data if that data is publicly available. I mean, AI can do all of that. Not every AI tool, but the more sophisticated, even the moderately sophisticated ones, frankly, can do a lot of that these days. And so, if marketing and public relations is the main thrust of the music industry these days, you could really have AI do that. You could even program AI to say, look, which musicians who regularly play at local clubs, or that probably more importantly these days have viral videos on the social platforms, who should we give a deal to and provide a little bit of investment for? Buy them their own home studio. Get them ready for the marketing campaign. AI could probably do that too. And given the fact that these old executives didn't know much about music, in many cases didn't like musicians, and other cases insulted musicians to their face, is it really a loss to mourn? I would say that while it would be sad if all human artists were replaced, if music executives were replaced by AI, I think a lot of people, including many musicians, would say good riddance. That's what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.